In this video, we will discuss fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is controlled by the government, whereas monetary policy is controlled by the central bank. Fiscal policy consists of changes in government spending, taxes, or transfers in order to achieve macroeconomic policy objectives. And when we say transfers are essentially the opposite of taxes. So examples of transfers would be things like Social Security payments, tax credits, like the earned income tax credit. So remember when we were talking about GDP, we said that GDP was made up of consumption spending plus investment spending plus spending on or government spending on goods and services and net exports. So it's pretty clear why changes in government spending will affect aggregate demand. But why will taxes or transfers affect aggregate demand? And the way that taxes and transfers operate is through consumption. So we can further define consumption as equal to some constant A plus some fraction B of disposable income. So A is what we call autonomous consumption spending, and it does not depend on income. So now, what do we mean by disposable income? Well, disposable income is total income, Y, and remember, Y is equal to GDP, but in the circular flow economy, income and output, or the value of output and income have to be equal to each other. So disposable income is equal to total income minus taxes minus transfers. And we call this net taxes. And so basically we're saying take what people earn, subtract how much they pay in taxes, minus what the government gives back to them, or net taxes. And that's the amount of money they have to spend, disposable income. So if net taxes increase, then people have less disposable income, and aggregate demand is going to shift to the left. If net taxes decrease, then people will have more disposable income, and consumption will increase, shifting aggregate demand to the right. So if the economy is in a recession with real GDP less than potential GDP, then the government wants to try to stimulate spending to increase aggregate demand and push output back towards potential output. So this is called expansionary fiscal policy. And in this case, the government can, in order to try to increase spending, they can directly increase spending by increasing government purchases of goods and services, or they can decrease taxes or increase transfers. And together, these decrease net taxes. And all of these actions should increase aggregate demand. Or I guess any one of those actions should increase aggregate demand. If instead the economy is in an expansion with an inflationary output gap, the government would want to implement contractionary fiscal policy. And if the economy has been experiencing inflation, this contractionary fiscal policy consists of decreasing spending to try to reining in spending to try to decrease aggregate demand and move output back towards potential output. So the government can decrease government spending directly, or they can increase taxes or decrease transfers, which taken together is an increase in net taxes. And any one of those actions, or multiple actions along those veins, should serve to decrease that aggregate demand curve or shift it to the left. Let's do a quick example. An economy starts in a long-run equilibrium at point A. If over the next year, long-run aggregate supply, short-run aggregate supply, and aggregate demand increase to LRAS2, SRAS2, and AD2, what could the government do to push the economy back towards a new long-run equilibrium? Okay, so pause the video and try to answer this question, and then we'll discuss. Okay, so initially at point A, the economy is in long-run equilibrium, producing at y sub p0, or our starting level of potential output. But over the next year, we have an increase in both long-run aggregate supply and short-run aggregate supply and aggregate demand to LRAS2, SRAS2, and AD2. So we need to find the new short-run equilibrium. So we end up here at point B, and Y2 is greater than potential output. So we have an inflationary gap. So Y2 is greater than YP1. Therefore, we have an inflationary output gap. And so in order to move the economy back towards long-run equilibrium, the government should be trying to rein in spending. And so in order to do that, they would need to either decrease government spending or increase net taxes. So this is contractionary fiscal policy. So we can look at our answer choices, which it looks like are all A, so let's correct that. And we can find the one that involves increasing taxes and decreasing government purchases. So increasing taxes, increase government purchases. Increase taxes, decrease government purchases. So the answer here is answer choice A. So there are kind of two components of fiscal policy: automatic stabilizers and discretionary fiscal policy. Automatic stabilizers are government spending and taxes that automatically adjust with the business cycle. So for example, in an expansion, when output is increasing and incomes are increasing, then income tax revenue is naturally going to increase because income taxes are a percent of people's income. However, when the economy is in a recession and output is decreasing, incomes are also decreasing, and so income tax revenue will fall. And so any sort of taxes, transfers, government spending that automatically adjust depending on whether the economy is in an expansion or a recession, those are called automatic stabilizers. Discretionary fiscal policy is when the government takes direct action to change taxes, transfers, or government purchases in an effort to affect the business cycle. So for instance, during the Great Recession, the federal government offered a $600 tax credit. So basically whatever you had to pay in taxes I think it was in 2008, So in 2008, whatever you had to pay in taxes, you could subtract $600 from that. And if you didn't owe $600 in taxes, then you got that money back in your pocket. And the idea is that that's going to stimulate consumer spending. So one big issue with fiscal policy that doesn't necessarily exist with monetary policy is what's called legislative lags. And so this is actually an issue with discretionary fiscal policy because the automatic stabilizers, remember, are automatically adjusting. But, the Fed is making their interest rate decisions 8 times a year. So they're able to pretty quickly respond when economic conditions change. Whereas the legislative branch of government, they have to wait to get wait to see how the economy does, and then they have to pass a resolution or a law to adjust government spending, taxes, transfers, and reaching an agreement, the legislative process in general takes time, and then when we have parties that are very polarized, reaching an agreement can be very difficult and take even more time. So fiscal policies can't respond or discretionary fiscal policies can't respond as quickly to changes in the state of the economy as monetary policy typically can.